public importance because since I first came to this joint many years ago, I've been advocating the interests of the education community across this country. I came here as a former teacher, someone with an ongoing interest in education, and having worked in remote communities, observed and understand what education means to people who live in the bush. And what we know is that if you live in the bush, you live in remote parts of Australia, your educational outcomes are going to be poorer than those who live in the city. Your health outcomes are poorer, your job opportunities are poorer. And we had the Prime Minister here this afternoon in question time talking about a high-wage economy, high-quality jobs, and have to be at the forefront of innovation. These were his words. Well, let me remind the Prime Minister, you won't be at the forefront of innovation if you can't ensure that every child in this country has equal access to a good educational outcome. You cannot. People will not get good jobs, high-quality jobs, unless every child in this country has access to a good and sound education. And you won't have people become entrepreneurs and set up a small business unless you can guarantee that every child in this country has equal access to a good educational outcome. And the fact is, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the Gonski reforms provided that opportunity for Australian students across the country, regardless of where they lived, regardless of their postcode, whether they lived in the eastern suburbs of Sydney or in 0870 in the Northern Territory. And that's important. But what's most important to me is the results that will happen, the result of what will happen when this funding is withdrawn after the $30 billion cuts are made post-2017. It will have a dramatic negative effect upon the outcomes of Aboriginal students in remote parts of the Northern Territory who suffer the worst educational outcomes in this country. And what we know is education is not only good for getting jobs, education is not only good for getting access to higher education, a good school education, but education will guarantee a better health outcome and we'll see people living longer. Now, people don't often make this connection, but it is very clear. And we know that in remote parts of Australia there are high numbers of students with FASD and other mental health issues. The funding cuts which are being made by this government will effectively mean that the support services that these kids require, that their families require to get a better educational outcome will be gone. So let's forget the bluff and bluster. Let's forget the overbearing rhetoric of the Prime Minister. The facts are very different. The facts are very different. They're interested in teacher quality. They're interested in school autonomy. These sorts of things are important, but they're not as important as making sure that every kid, every school has the resources it needs to get the educational outcomes that we expect of every family in this country. And what this government is doing is guaranteeing that needs-based funding will not apply after 2017. And we know the significant importance of having additional resources in schools. Money does make a difference. Money does make a difference. The capital that the former Labor government put into schools, the building infrastructure in schools around this country had a very significant impact on educational outcomes and educational opportunities for people who live in remote and rural Australia. I know this. And people who live in the bush know this. Yet we've got this government saying money isn't an issue. Money is an issue. Money is a significant issue. And we've now got the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory coming out in an article today in today's NT News, education epic fail fears because of cuts in funding. Now, he's right. But what he's driven to do, and as a result of the pernicious attitude of this government, they're driven to saying, well, how do we raise the additional income we require? Now, the Northern Territory is a mendicant community. Around 80% of their budget revenue is derived from the Commonwealth. And now what they're being forced to do now is consider a GST increase. This is the poorest part of Australia, who can least afford a GST increase. They already pay more tax than anyone else because of the GST on goods and services that already applies, because they pay higher costs. So now there's a double whammy. You either accept the government's requirement and the government's attitude, or you lose the support. And that's what's happening in this case. The
Order.
government should be
I
condemned.
call the member for Dobell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I do take my role as a federal member very importantly. And